As we get into lesson 5.2, evaluating expressions, notice I have an A here. We are going to divide this up into two different lessons because there are so many steps that we need to understand. And I want us to take it step by step and we can understand and truly be able to be successful with these. It is all about understanding the order of operations, being able to follow that process correctly by rebuilding math problems as we work through them. Some of you are going to try to take shortcuts and you're going to mess them up because you lose track of what you're doing. I'm going to ask that you learn how to write these exactly the way I'm showing you. Our first and foremost thing that we need to understand is what we're being asked to do. So we're going to be doing multi-step math problems. When we do these multi-step math problems, then we need to be able to write and evaluate a numerical expression using the correct order of operations. So then we ask, well, what does that mean? So the idea of numerical just simply means a number, right? So we have numbers that we're going to be using. So we don't have algebra, we don't have missing pieces, and we don't have letters. Expressions, once again, as we said in the last lesson, are math problems that do not have an answer. So if there isn't an answer, then I'm given the math problem. As you can see where it says learn numerical expressions, it shows a multi-step math problem. There isn't an answer. There aren't letters. So I have to be able to do them step by step. How do I know what the steps are? We follow our order of operations. We will ask for several extra presents from my dear Aunt Sally. Ask for is our absolute values. We do not have those in our math lessons yet, but we will get to some of those. Several extra presents, square roots, we have not gotten to yet, but we will get to that. Extra is exponents, which is what lesson 5.1 is about. Presents, we have parentheses that set math apart. From my dear, multiplication and division from left to right. And then we finish with Aunt Sally, adding and subtracting from left to right. So we're given this expression. There's a lot of steps that we need to be able to follow in this expression, but it's pretty easy because we're just simply going to go step by step. When I first look at it, I agree, it's overwhelming. So let's look for first any absolute value. Where are the absolute value? Well, there aren't any. How about square roots? Nope, there's none of those. Extra exponents, do I have any of those? I sure do. So I'm going to work with my exponents and my parentheses first and foremost. So my exponents, let's look at the exponents. We have 6 squared. What does that look like mathematically? Hopefully you know that it's not 12, and you know that it is showing us that our base is to be written down in a multiplication problem 2 different times. So we take 6 times 6. We also have parentheses that has subtraction inside. So we have to do our parentheses first before we do any of the multiplication, division, addition, or subtraction. So exponents and parentheses. So 6 times 6 is 36. When I look at my parentheses, I have 14 minus 9, and 14 minus 9 is 5. Now, notice how I've dropped everything straight down underneath where I was working. So now what I'm going to expect you to do is to rebuild your math problem. Not only will I expect you to do this, but for your next 3 years of school, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade at least, in your math classes, they will expect you to do the exact same thing. So we're going to rebuild. So I'm going to be putting some arrows and showing you that I'm dropping things straight down. I don't expect you to show the arrows, but I do expect you to drop everything straight down. I must keep them in the exact same order in which I have them so I don't mess up my math problem. So what you're left with now is a new math expression, a numerical expression, of 36 minus 12 divided by 3 plus 5 times 2. Now, I want to do all multiplication and division from left to right. So my first thing that I'm looking for is any multiplication and division signs. Notice that I have 12 divided by 3. Now it says multiplication and division from left to right. So does that mean I need to start with 5 times 2? No, because we say from left to right. So if I have division first, like I do in this situation, then I'm going to divide first. Then I'll do my multiplication. Since they're not directly connected, it won't change my answer if I do it correctly. However, if they were directly connected and I wanted to do multiplication first, it would change my answer. So let's do our division. We have 12 divided by 3. Once again, we're going to go from left to right. 12 divided by 3 is 4. And then I have 5 times 2, and 5 times 2 is 10. So I'm going to start to slide my things closer to the center as I rebuild my math problems so that everything's not completely spread out across my paper. But notice everything's going to stay in the same order that originated as. The 36 just comes down. I drop my subtraction. I get my answer of 12 divided by 3 is 4. Bring down my addition, and 5 times 2 is indeed 10. So now I'm left with all addition and subtraction from left to right. So now I'm going to add and subtract from left to right. Notice these are directly connected to one another. If I start with addition first, it could mess me up. So I want to make sure that I go from left to right. When I take 36 minus 4, I get 32. Then in turn, I'm going to add 10 to it. So I'm rebuilding my math problem. I bring it all down, and now I have 32 plus 10, which is 42. Once again, I rebuild my math each and every step that I go through so that I can see what my previous steps were. Once again, you're going to be expected to do that not just for me in 6th grade, but also for your next 3 years of math that you have to take through junior high and your first year of high school. Beyond that, then you get into your higher classes, and if you do take your higher math classes, they'll expect the same thing from you. So once again, as we go through these numerical expressions, we need to follow the order of operations always and forever. We always start looking for absolute values, square roots, exponents, and parentheses, and we're right now just focusing in on exponents and parentheses. We'll get to absolute values and square roots a little later on. Then we'll do all multiplication and division from left to right, followed by all addition and subtraction from left to right. So I want to start at the beginning. I'm looking for exponents. I'm looking for parentheses. Notice that I have 3 squared and 6 plus 4 in parentheses. 3 squared, or 3 to the power of 2, means I take my base, multiply it by itself 2 times. Once again, that's not 6. It is 3 times 3, which is 9. Inside the parentheses, I have 6 plus 4, which is 10. Those are basic math problems, not difficult. Now I'm going to rewrite my math problem. Once again, I do not expect the red arrows to be shown on your paper, but I do expect the next math problem to be shown, which is 100 minus 9 times 10 plus 2. In 7th grade, 8th grade, and your high school math classes, your teachers are going to expect the exact same thing. This is the way that mathematicians make sure that they don't make any mistakes. Now I'm going to look for all multiplication and division from left to right. Going from left to right is important. I'll show you that here in just a moment. So I only have one set of multiplication and or division. That's multiplication, 9 times 10, which is 90. So when I do that, I bring everything else down. Now I'm shifting towards the center, so once again, everything's not spread out. But my new math problem that I expect to see on everybody's paper is 100 minus 90 plus 2. My final step is doing all addition and subtraction from left to right. So I have to start with 100 minus 90. It does not matter which one comes first. It matters that I go from left to right. So 100 minus 90 gives me 10. 10 plus 2 gives me an answer of 12. Now, you may be wondering, does it really matter if I follow the order of operations? That answer is yes. Please don't write this down, but I'm going to show you the math if I just go from left to right like I read. That's not math, right? So let's just look at what we have. Now I can't do my first math step of 100 minus 3 squared. So I need to go ahead and solve for that, which is 3 times 3. And once again, that is 9. So then I look and I have 100 minus 9. And then I have in parentheses, well, that's going to be my 10. So times 10 plus 2. All right. Now I'm going to go from left to right. 100 minus 9 gives me what? 91. I bring everything else down. And then I'm going to multiply 91 times 10, which is 910 plus 2 gives me 912. Is that the same answer? Not even close. So following the order of operations is vital to get the correct math answer. Please make sure you're following the order of operations, such as this. So when we're going to evaluate this, now notice I have something new. I have brackets. Well, the brackets are basically just a bigger set of parentheses. So what they're saying is I have parentheses inside, and I have to do that first. And then I have to make sure I do the bigger parentheses, or the brackets, before I do anything else in my order of operations. So I have to start once again with my exponent because it's inside of the parentheses. Any math that's inside parentheses has to be done first, and that is going to be 2 times 2 times 2. Then I will be able to add the parentheses. Then I will subtract it from the 23. That's what the bracket's telling me. So I have 3 steps there that I have to do all on the left before I look at the multiplication and addition. So we start with our exponent. 2 times 2 times 2. Well, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. Or I pick up my handy dandy calculator and I type in 2 times 2 times 2 equals, and I see that it's 8. And then I'm going to add, right? So I have to focus in on just the parentheses. 8 plus 8. Well, 8 plus 8 is 16. Now I have my bigger parentheses or my brackets, and I focus in on those. And now I have to do the 23 minus 16. Once again, I have to focus in on those big brackets because that's just saying, hey, this all has to be done first before I look at anything over to the right. So everything there on the left gives me a final answer of 7. Now I can bring everything else down. I keep my multiplication of 2. I keep my addition of 10. Everything stays in the same order. And then I can focus in on multiplication and division from left to right. I have multiplication. 7 times 2 is 14. I'm left with adding 10. 14 plus 10 is 24. Is it difficult? I hope not. It's not meant to be difficult. It's just looking at each of the pieces in a numerical expression and doing them in the correct order. All right, so we're going to work through just 2 more math problems on today's notes, and then I'll give you just a couple of problems I want you to work just to make sure we can practice and we understand this process. So as we see this math problem, we can see that we do have parentheses, but inside parentheses, we have our exponents. So we know that we have to do our exponents first according to our order of operations, then we can do what's inside of parentheses. So when I look at my exponents, I know that's 8 to the second power, or 8 squared. That looks like, mathematically, 8 times 8. And 8 times 8, if you don't know, you get your handy calculator, but it is 64. Then I can bring everything else down that's inside the parentheses and do that math problem. Now I have 64 divided by 2/5. I can't do multiplication and division of whole numbers and fractions, so I know I have to put 64 over 1. But then I have to ask myself, well, can I divide fractions? And that answer is no. So what do I have to do? I have to KFC it. So we're going to keep our first fraction. We're going to flip our second fraction, and then we're going to change our division to multiplication. Now can I multiply fractions? Yes. And I can multiply fractions, and some of you prefer just to multiply across, so we'll do that. 1 times 2 gives me a denominator of 2. And then 64 times 5, I don't know that off the top of my head, so I would get my handy dandy calculator and I would type in 64 times 5, and I find out that that's 320. So now that's an improper fraction. So I know I need to divide, and if I'm going to divide, which one goes inside the division box? That's the top number. So I take 320 divided by 2, the bottom number, and 2 goes into 3 one time, which is 2 with a remainder of 1. Bring down my 2. 2 goes into 12 6 times. That's 12 with the remainder of 0. But since I bring down a 0, I have to bring something up. I know that's equal to 160. Now, those of you that like to work with smaller numbers, which I prefer, instead of multiplying across and dividing, you could cross reduce. So I'm just reviewing that process with you here. So if I cross reduce, I see that the 2 and the 64 are both even numbers. That means they can both be reduced by 2. 2 goes into 2 one time, and 2 goes into 64 32 times. And if I don't know what 32 times 5 is, which I wouldn't unless I had my calculator, then I would just multiply across when I do it. So my denominators are 1 times 1 and 32 times 5, which is 160. So since it's over 1, I can just keep my 160, which is what we had when we multiplied and then divided. Then I can bring everything else down. I bring down my 5 and my addition sign. I bring down my 2, my multiplication sign. And now I have to go back to my order of operations. Multiply and divide from left to right. So I have to do my 160 times 2. And as we saw earlier, if I change the process that I do it, if I do it in the wrong order, I will not get the correct answer. So I want to make sure that I do it in the right order. 160 times 2 is 320. I bring down my addition of 5. Notice I'm rebuilding my math problem each and every time. 5 plus 320 gives me 325 as my final answer. Our last one that we're going to do then has this math problem, and we have some decimal work, so we'll have to review how we do our decimals there. But we see that once again we have our exponent inside the parentheses, so we have to do that first. Then we can do our parentheses work. So I have 2 to the 4th power, which mathematically would look like 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. When I type that into my calculator, notice I don't get 8. I get 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which is 16. So make sure you're doing the right math. I bring down the rest of what's inside my parentheses, which is minus 3. 16 minus 3 gives me 13. Now I bring everything else down. So I bring down my 8.2, my multiplication sign, I bring down my addition, I bring down my 8, multiply and divide from left to right according to my order of operations. Well, how do I multiply decimals? Well, we look back at lesson 3.2. If we don't remember, we have our examples of multiplying decimals. We know we can multiply decimals, so I stack them and multiply. Then I count my decimal spaces and move from right to left that many times. So I'm going to start with multiplying by my 3. 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 times 8 is 24. My second number tells me to bring down 1 0, and then I can multiply by my 1. And 1 times any number is itself, so 1 times 82 is 82. Everything is lined up nice and neat, so I add going straight down in my columns. 6 and 0 is 6, 4 and 2 is 6, 8 and 2 is 10. Now, my steps once again is count my decimal spaces. Once again, it's not decimal points, it's how many spaces are in the math problem. There is only one decimal space, so I'm going to move from right to left one time, which gives me an answer of 106.6. Now I bring everything else down. So now I have a new math problem written on my paper. How can I add decimals? Well, some of you still want to line up the 8 underneath the far right, and that's not what we do because we have to line up our decimals. And as you notice, the 8 doesn't have a decimal with it. So I'm simply going to add it, and we know, hopefully we know by now, that a decimal is always at the end of a number. Once my decimals are lined up, I fill in with zeros, I bring down my decimal, then I simply add. 6 plus 0 is 6, 8 plus 6 is 14, carry my 1. 1 plus nothing is 1, and then 1 plus nothing is 1. So my final answer on this one is 114.6. All right, so we've reviewed this process, introduced this process, gone through all of these processes. So I have just a couple math problems I want you to come and get and do your best on them. And I'm going to give you a hint. I'm giving you the answers on the back of the paper. I just want to make sure that you can get to the correct answers.